Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chai Time with BIX. Tell us where you're tuning in from. We would love to know. My name is Annette Phillip, and joining me are my dear BIX colleagues Rohit Jairaman and Lydia Reynolds. Hey, everyone.
Hey,
So,
hey.
Chai Time with BIX is very, very close to our hearts. If you're an artist and you feel vulnerable, this is your home. Most interviews seem to focus on achievements, and at BIX, we wanted to do a
Hello,
series
everyone, and
about
welcome to
how to
Chai
grow
Time with
rather
Bix.
than simply
Tell
celebrating
us where
big
you're tuning
wins.
in from. We would
Art
love
isn't
to
just
know.
about
My name is
performance,
Annette
it's
Phillip,
a way of
and
life,
joining me
meaning
are
life
my dear
happens as
Bix
we're trying to be
colleagues Rohit
artists.
Jairaman
Art is
and
not
Lydia
made
Reynolds.
in a vacuum. Our environment and what's happening around us impacts us, and through us, our art. So much is going on in the world right now, from Black Lives Matter to natural calamities, all of which is happening in the context of COVID 19. And while we're protesting, volunteering, demanding change, speaking up, we also need music and creativity to keep us inspired, to anchor us, to help us reset, recharge, and re energize. So, thank you today for joining Berklee India Exchange on Chai Time with Bix and just being part of this space and time of connection with our amazing guest, Sid Sriram.
So, before we actually bring Sid on, we'd love to make a couple of announcements. It would be amazing for us if this could be as interactive an experience as possible. So, in order to create that environment, let's first all hit the share button. If you're having a good time so far, if you're excited for this event, share it with your friends. Let's get everybody in the room because this is going to be amazing.
Yes.
Secondly, I'd also like to point out that I think we're going to have our social info in the chats and comments posted in a second. So that will make it easier for you to share. I'd also like to say that we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of today, but start posting all of your questions from the get-go. Let's just have them coming in the entire time. If there's a comment, if there's something that sparks an idea in you, put it out there. I'll be monitoring all both chats and we'll be collecting all of your questions and hopefully we can get to everything. There's only an hour today. We'll see. I'll be picking out the ones that stand out most to me. So hit us, guys. And I think that's everything from my end. So let's introduce our guest.
Yeah, who is joining us today? I'm particularly excited, given that he's a fellow Bay Area-ite, but he's also an incredibly, renowned vocalist, composer, songwriter, producer, and just, an amazing person who's also, one of the kind of realist people that we know. So I'm very, very excited to invite to Chai Time with Bix, Sid Sriram.
Hey
Woohoo!
everyone, I have my
Hey,
mug
Sid.
as well.
That's so cool.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Sid. So, actually,
Thank you
do
for
you
having
do
me.
you have a story about the mug?
Yeah, actually the one I wanted to tell a story about is in the wash today.
Oh.
So I have another one. But the one I there's like this mug is also super old, but there's another one that has like this white paint or sorry, blue and white paint on like the top of it. It looks similar to this. You
Uh-huh.
can't even see what's on this because of the light. But
Oh.
I wrote a lyric back in like 2013, 14 time frame.
Hmm.
And these are mugs we've had since I was like, we moved to the States in 91, 92-ish. So
Yeah.
probably like 95. So they've been with the family for a long time. But yeah, 2014, I wrote a lyric and the lyric was Blue Porcelain Tucked Away into a Paper Jail. It's a song called Moments of Weakness. So that
Oh.
was written looking at the mug. So
Wow.
that's my story.
That's so
That's
beautiful.
so
Yeah.
cool.
I love that. Aw. And
That's awesome.
yeah, Ro, you know,
Oh, people are
be
so excited.
yeah, I know, I see it. Ro, you have a long connection with Sid, and actually, I always thank Ro's mom and dad for lending us Rohit for a couple of years. But then I figured out that actually we have to thank you for a lot of that. Ro, you
Oh
should tell that
man.
story.
I mean, I'm sure some people who are here have heard me tell the story before, but I've known Sid. It still takes some training in my brain to call you Sid. But I've known you my whole life, and hanging out at various concerts and events. And
Music events, yeah, for sure.
and I remember at some point I think I was a junior in high school, and I'm sure we met at some CIFA concert or something, and you said, well, what are you going to do in college? You know, you're going to start in about a year. And I said, oh, I'll probably be pre-med and then go to med school and, you know, be a good kid. And then you said, oh, have you thought about music? And I was like, oh, like in what context? And then you said, well, there's this place, Berklee, you should check it out. And I was like, oh yeah, it's like, you know, right down the street. And you're like, no, it's in Boston. And so you said, you know, check that out and see what you think. It's just all music, and it's a great place. So I went home, I signed up for a summer program, and I think the next summer I went, and
we met up
6 days. Yeah, we met up. You took me to Pho Basil.
Pho Basil, yeah. Of course, I remember that like, clearly, man.
Yeah. Huge BIX hang. But yeah, I mean, in that week of like, you know, you kind of showing me around and then seeing the vibe at Berklee was, I mean, in that 6 days, it was like, yep, this is what I'm going to do. And kind of, I mean, my life has been pretty Berklee forward since, I think I can say confidently. And then getting to be with BIX and make fun music and crazy things. So yeah,
it's been beautiful, man. I'm glad. I'm well honored that you gave me the shout out, but yeah, I'm glad that you went that direction. I think Berklee is a better place having you there. So
awesome. Well, thanks for that, and thanks for sending me over.
Of course, man. Of course.
Yeah. So, you know, ever since your, you know, Berklee time, you know, you have had such an unconventional journey. And I think even, especially for a lot of Indians, there's this notion that, you know, by this age you should have achieved this, and by this age you should have achieved, you should have a car, and by this age you should get married, and there's all these things, and also about just in general success. So, can you talk a little bit about that, Sid?
Sure. I think it started young for me in that at quite a young age, I realized that music was like the biggest thing that like shook me in my bones. You know, I was born in Chennai, but we moved to the States, to the Bay Area where I am right now in 91. I was born in 1990. Mm-hmm. And soon after we moved here, my mom started teaching Carnatic music here. So like my proximity to music was like, it was just right there all the time. And just fast forward, like when I started going to school and all, it was fine. I always felt a little out of place. Just because I did where I went to school through like elementary to high school was very academically rigorous. And I wasn't averse to that, but it was like I said, music was the thing that kind of like really spoke to me. And I don't know, you know, how many people believe in like reincarnation and whatnot, but like I felt from a young age that like I had entered this world with a certain level of weight, I guess would be the term. It was just like this kind of like karmic weight. And I realized it early, and it would come in like spurts. It would kind of hit me at different points in time. And I identified music as my way of kind of figuring my way through these different pretty heavy emotions that I felt from a young age. So, you know, I identified this beautiful art form that brought me a sense of great peace and also belonging. And I just kind of followed that through. I definitely did give my parents, you know, like a fair deal of worry growing up because I wasn't the easiest like child. And I was a tad bit problematic, but at the same time, my mom was a music teacher, is a music teacher, she's my guru to this day. And my father also, they just identified that I had this passion and affinity towards this. So they were actually like completely on board.
That's great. Yeah.
And they, you know, like, I guess you'd say cliches that we kind of attribute to the Indian parent of like being very strict and all that. Those weren't completely untrue in my case. They just took it and they kind of directed it towards music with me. You know, it was like, okay, if you're going to do this, then you got to really do it. So that kind of, so it was like a, you know, this combination of me having this passion, also having parents that really kind of drove me in that area. And when I got to Berklee in 2008, that's probably when I started to actualize, okay, I have these different things within me and I want to see what I can do with them. And that was it. When I started there, it wasn't like me and my folks had talked, and I was like, I want to get a Grammy at the end of my first year there and stuff like that. You know, very unrealistic things. But other than that, it was all like this big abstract that just like stood before me.
Yeah.
And I started chipping away at it the only way I knew how, you know. And I think in that way, I think that's where like the unconventional nature of my journey has kind of, it's just always, that's been the theme, like taking the skill sets, the tools that I know that I have, taking these big abstract, either existential questions or musical concepts or whatever, and just chipping away at them however I know. And at the time, sometimes I felt like, oh, I really don't know what I'm doing, you know? But I just kept chipping, and as the years progressed, I was able to kind of take a step back and look at, oh, this is actually quite beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what were some of the steps that, you know, like, I find that in my personal journey there are these little moments. They're not necessarily huge epic moments where,
Sure.
oh, this is, you know, the call from the person.
Yes.
But sometimes they're very subliminal shifts or pivots.
Sure.
And were there some of those where you're like, I could go this way or that, and I'm just going to go, you know,
Definitely.
in another direction maybe. So
yeah, I love that. I think they've been like you said, like they're very subtle, and they're not these major like aha moments by any means. They're like these small things, and I think just some that I can definitely identify. I'm sure some have occurred subconsciously without me even knowing, that have just kind of like pushed me in certain directions. The ones I can identify, I remember like one thing that happened when I was really young, probably like maybe like 5th or 6th grade, maybe a little bit older than that, but I was practicing Carnatic music, and I just kind of started to dive into the vast ocean that is improvising in Carnatic music, and I wasn't really getting it. You know, it was probably far too advanced for my mind to really kind of wrap around, but subconsciously, like on an intuitive level, sometimes there'd be these points of like, oh, that's what it is. But something I started doing then, which I've kind of held on to ever since, is closing my eyes when I sing. And at the time, it didn't feel like anything. It just felt like, okay. But for the whole span of that, like I think it was like I was practicing for, let's say, an hour. I had my eyes closed the whole time. And the level of, forget focus, but the level of peace and kind of just being able to lock into a certain, not even vision, but just a space, you know, just like finding a space that felt like it was not of the external world.
Yeah.
That was probably the first time, and it wasn't like a big thing for sure. My father, who was in the room when I was practicing, later made mention of it, and that's when I realized, oh, I didn't even really realize that was something I was doing. That was one thing, because I think that in a way shifted me into going inside, you know, and going internal, and making the journey just as much about deep diving within as much as like performing for the external world. That's one. One other one I think was in 2011. So I had taken a year away from Boston at that time. I had done a semester in LA for the internship program. And then I was spending one semester just at home, just to kind of, that was an interesting time. That was like when I really kind of started to understand myself better. So I think just to kind of grapple with that, and I decided to take a semester off. And that same semester, I lost my grandfather and aunt. This was like April and May. And up until then, you know, being in LA, and I was interning at like a label the semester prior, I wanted to make like super poppy music and just kind of like be seen. That was my biggest thing, is like I want to be seen, be heard. I want to be out there.
Sure.
And the two losses that my family and I had in that year were my first big like losses of loved ones. I never, you know, that I could process. So that definitely subconsciously put me on a certain path of questioning, again, diving back into music for solace. And I was making music. I had like these MP3s on my computer at the time that, again, like I very intentionally made them pop records, but without much heart in them.
Sure.
And I listened back one day and I was like, you know what, screw it. I don't want to do this anymore. I remember listening to Lauryn Hill's Unplugged, MTV Unplugged album that evening, and just being so moved by how raw it was. Yeah. And, you know, and a few months after that is when me and Doc Skim did this cover of We All Try by Frank Ocean. And that was like that night in my bedroom upstairs in the same house, that was like the seed for me to kind of make this shift into just wanting to express myself and let the world see that, you know, and not dress it up a bunch or not try to be something just for the purpose of getting attention or whatever. And that cover I could pretty arguably say was like the moment that I think my career really kind of started.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think those 2 points for sure.
Well, I can attest to that. I remember, you know, I mean, we had little things at Berklee that we would sing together, or with Joey Blake, you know, circle songs.
Shout out Joey, yeah, for sure.
And I remember one of the gigs I had a blessing to accompany you at, and you know, we'd been playing that song for a while with different singers, and then you came in for that one gig in that tour, and you just were yourself. And I remember really remembering what the song was about, you know, in a totally different way. And I so appreciate what you said about closing your eyes. I mean, it's such an interesting thing because, you know, at Berklee, one of the things that I was always told, especially by any teachers, was like, open your eyes, you know, that's the window into your soul. And I always struggled with that. You know, I never felt that it mattered that much. I would try, but I'm just really happy to hear you say that point. It feels like a little bit of a validation for all of us who like to sing with our eyes closed for most of it. So
yeah, I've gotten the critique during Berklee, Berklee, like when I was like living in LA, trying to like kind of hustle my career over there. Like, open your eyes, people want to see you. And but you know, again, it comes down to, I think, whatever allows one to express oneself most honestly. If that's how you feel at home, then that's how you feel at home. And,
exactly. Yeah. So shifting it very slightly, you know, let's talk about identity. I think a lot of young artists, and you know, you went through that. You just talked about that feeling like, oh, I'm going to make this pop stuff, and then having that pivot and having that maybe loss that turned out to be you know, a key that opened something in you. Sure. So that's one side of it. But also, I know a lot of
I think we're having some technical difficulties.
It's all good. It's all good.
But I think what maybe she was trying to get at was this, alongside this idea of identity, being someone who's kind of got a foot in both traditions of kind of having this very Indian aspect to you, being trained in Carnatic music and coming from India early in your life, and then you know, then exploring other traditions that you grew up listening to, and you know, like the Frank Ocean cover you talked about, and really exploring that side of your musicality.
Sure.
And I don't know if Annette wants to.
Let's go there.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, the way I've kind of come to understand it myself, again, these were things that happened at an early age where I wasn't really kind of intentionally being like, okay, I want to get into this kind of music or that. So the Carnatic music was, again, like I said, it was like the ocean that just birthed my musical journey, you know, and it's been my framework and it's been home ever since. It's kind of how, to this day, I kind of perceive music, sound, everything kind of comes from that tradition. And very luckily, it is a vast tradition that is very, you know, there's no ends to it has parameters, but within those parameters, what you can discover, what you can explore is damn near infinite. So because of that, it's always felt like got more to learn, you know. It's never felt limiting at all. But at a very early age, I got into just black music, you know. I got into Stevie Wonder. I remember the first 2 CDs that I went and bought, I think at the time it was like Tower Records, or I don't remember, maybe it was Borders, actually. Yeah, it was Borders. Books and CDs, yeah. I bought a Count Basie, like a big band album, and I got Stevie Wonder, Natural Wonder, his live in Japan CD, that double disc. And I'd first listened to Stevie Wonder like on TV, like in passing, like he just came on. It was either a show or like a special or something. And I got hooked to Overjoyed, which I'm sure is like a song that a lot of people like fell in love with of his at first. So I bought that CD, and that's when I was like, oh wow, like this is something else. Just because that honesty that we're talking about, you know, it was so palpable in every aspect. And it was just like headphones, you know, I couldn't see anything, but I felt like I was transported into like a world. And I think it helped that it was a live album, you know, that really kind of just like captivated me. So that led me into like a whole journey with Donny Hathaway, Luther Vandross, Ray Charles, and countless Shaka Khan, just countless other musicians, black musicians that, you know, just what it did for me at that point. And I was around like 10, 11, 12-ish, like around that age. And I think what it really did is there's a certain soulfulness I always felt from Carnatic music when I sang. And like my mom has always been a stickler for like open-throated, using your full voice, not dumbing it down, not dumbing it, not quietening your voice. She's always been very like, you know, like use your whole voice. You have one, sing from your gut. And I listened to these black artists. I was like, yo, that's the same thing, you know, kind of like obviously manifesting in a very different aesthetic way. So when I kind of found that link of raw soul, you know, kind of connecting in these two worlds, I was like, oh, that's the magic right there as well. So from a young age, I just obsessed with R&B, with soul, with jazz. And then I started singing those songs in like talent shows. And Rohit, I don't know for you, but like for me, serious performances were either like, you know, community gatherings, like Tyagaraja or whatnot. Right. And then school talent shows. Again, like my mom took those things very seriously because those were our moments to like kind of go perform and showcase what we did. So me and my older sister Pallavi, we'd go perform at those. So, you know, like it was like I was performing both forms of music since a young age, though not like very seriously, but for us it felt quite serious then. And I just let these two forms kind of raise me, you know. Through the years, the R&B music gave me a portal to get into hip hop, you know, and like Tribe Called Quest. In terms of more contemporary artists, Kanye, and that all just like these two forms of music. At the time, I siloed them for sure. I kept them separate. I was like, okay, can't mix the two at all, which I think in retrospect was good because it allowed me to kind of like understand both forms in isolation, just to kind of acclimate myself, understand the different dimensions and whatnot. By the time I got to Berklee, I was trying to find my identity as a person, as a musician, as an artist, as a creative, all that, you know. And that age, I think I was like 17, 18 when I started over there, is like formative in many ways. So I was at first very, very, very timid and kind of shy about showcasing the Indian side of myself, just because especially at that time, we didn't see anyone that looked like us in the popular kind of like pop culture. There's not as many Indian people then, I think, as there are now.
Like 3 or 4.
10, yeah, right.
Even,
right. So, and then I started writing a song. I stayed at the 150 Mass Ave dorms, and my first 2 years, and I would go to the piano practice rooms just all the time. And I didn't really know. I learned piano like a couple years when I was a kid. This one really good Russian teacher used to teach me, but she was like super she would get pissed at me, so I stopped learning. Yeah, exactly. She was great. I remember like I was actually getting good, but then I was like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. But yeah, that's a tangent. I got to Berklee. Those piano practice rooms were my like temple. You know, I would be there every day, just trying to figure out the instrument one, and also like thinking about, okay, if I want to make my own music, what is it going to sound like? What is my personal statement going to be? And I think that kind of desire to put forth something that felt unique to me was always present. Quiet at first, but it was there, and I just followed that. And then that was 2008. I feel like in the last 5 years, maybe I've started to really kind of hone in on what I want this unique statement to be. It's taken a long time, and it's still ever evolving.
So actually, could you tell us, I mean, where has it evolved from to?
So like how I was talking about the silos, and so like the first song I ever wrote that kind of brought the worlds together was the song called California Air. And that song was like it was like, it had nice chords and all, and it was a song, and then the end of it I did one long alap, and that was it. So like at that time, like that was my way of like introducing it. It still didn't feel all the way authentic or like just like new. It just felt like I was like, okay, here's your Indian section kind of thing. You know what I mean? So from that point to now, where it's kind of come is also me just really diving into the Carnatic form so much more and understanding the Carnatic form so much more, like the different layers to it. Where I've kind of evolved it to is just breaking the silos completely. Saying, okay, these are all shades in the spectrum that is my identity, and making songs that almost feel like kaleidoscopes. Like depending on how you turn them, you're gonna get a different light that gets shown on a specific aspect. And I did grow up on music that was you listen to it, each time you listen to it, you find something kind of new. Right. And so that's also been a big thing, like, making these songs and pieces that are layered and definitely represent the diversity that is my identity, and not shying away from any one aspect of it, and doing that. That's all kind of like on the music perspective. Lyrically, it's just been there's a song called Eyes Open that was on my last album, Entropy. And I think that probably has the most, it was like a statement of my identity. It felt like that. Lyrically, it felt like, there's, besides me being Indian, growing up in California, there is something like deeper than all of that in terms of like, when I was at the beginning of this conversation, I was talking about inheriting a weight when I was born into, like, that song felt like it really kind of spoke to that, spoke to my outlook on the world. So, yeah, those lyrics, I can just speak a little bit. It's, Brown man, burnt a lot of bridges, dove headfirst into rivers of mirrors, millions of them self-reflected. Is it harder to trust someone or to be trusted? And it goes on. But it's just kind of like my view on relationships, how I've dealt with relationships, my shortcomings, all that. And I guess like it's interesting. Whereas in the beginning of when I first started writing music, I felt like I had to like just put a bunch of stuff in it. And like, like without much intention. Now the journey has been like peeling back layers, both as a human being and also sonically, and letting it just sit there in the rawest form. I'm working on an album right now. I've been working on it for like the last 6 months, but especially for the last 2 months.
Yeah.
And it feels like this is what I've heard in my head for like over a decade. So fingers crossed it comes out the way I want it to.
Wow. Yeah, I can't wait for that. I like the kaleidoscope visual, actually. Yeah. That helped a lot. The thing with, being yourself, which I think you very much are, you're very authentically yourself.
Thank you.
And I say it as a fact, not even as a compliment.
Sure.
And consciously or unconsciously, when we are putting things out as even a somewhat public persona, we do create a brand, right?
Yes.
And once you have an audience, which now you have a massive audience and it's a very global, diverse audience, how do you deal with expectations? Do you feel like, you've been able to still steer your own path, or do you ever feel pulled by your audience wanting to satisfy what they're asking for? And do you harmonize that at all, or do you
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, I think it's a constant balance. Cause we're constantly, as artists, as entertainers, we're constantly serving ourselves and serving the people who we exist for. Like, again, I love singing, I love making music, but I wouldn't want to just be doing it alone in a room for the rest of my life. What makes it truly, truly meaningful and worthwhile is the connection
Yep.
that comes from it. So, once you have a platform and once people are checking in, once people are fans, and they look up to what you do, that has an impact on the art for sure. I think a positive one. I think, like, for me, obviously there are pushes and pulls,
Yeah.
all the time. But I think the aspect of having people really, really dig the music and really kind of look out for what you're doing and coming to shows and really supporting truly, it's just instilled a deeper sense of purpose for me. And I have a really strong unit, in my family, in my loved ones, in my mentors. So ultimately, like, over the last, I can't say this was true when I was in college, but since then, over the years, I've developed a strong sense of core fundamental principles that I think make me who I am, both as an artist and as a human, since they're just like kind of like feed into each other. And I let those, core principles kind of guide me. And that's like the unshakable kind of like, those are the roots. And then from that point, there are different, gusts of wind that kind of like push me this way or that way. But I have these things that I know, like, if something doesn't sit right with my spirit, I'm aware pretty quickly, and I don't go in that direction. Now, singing for films, in the Tamil, Telugu, and Malayalam industries, that is a whole other experience unto itself, because in those moments, in those recordings, I'm not the one creating the pieces, so I'm getting put into these positions that are sometimes uncomfortable, like artistically, things that I wouldn't have done on my own. But then open up a whole other like dimension of my musical artistic consciousness that I can internalize and then feel like, oh, this is now also a part of who I am. So I guess my outlook is I'm open to getting pulled this way and that, because that's what makes this fun. I'm not super rigid and like, okay, this is the only thing I'm going to do. But at the same time, I like I said, I know what feels right to me. And I think the push and pull, being able to stand my ground when I have to, all of this together has kind of sculpted where I'm at today, and it'll continue to kind of, again, just chip away at whatever is there.
I think what is pivotal is what you talked about, that you have a very strong support base. And I think that in some ways is also the privilege of having been supported. So I know a lot of artist friends of mine who are struggling with that aspect itself. They don't have that at home belief, encouragement, faith. And
Sure.
in those kind of situations, have you met someone like that, and or do you have something that you used in a moment where maybe everybody else was really at odds with
Yeah.
you, and you still had to, you know, really reflect, go inward, and still make a choice that was different from everybody else. Have you had that experience, or, you know, is there something you could share that might help?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if I've had like a clear like here's a time when that happened,
Yeah.
but there have been multiple moments. Even like I said, I have a strong family unit, but with that said, they haven't always felt the most encouraged at like the way at which I'm moving, you know. And again, this isn't really true anymore.
But in the initial days, I can
yeah,
imagine.
for
Yeah.
sure, you know.
Yeah.
And I was a college kid. Being a college kid, you know, I wasn't like there like in the library or like in the piano practice rooms all the time. I was going out, you know, and I was, you know, being in college. And I'm sure that wasn't the most encouraging for my folks. At the same time, and you know, like because of that, there was doubt. Like, what is this kid gonna do? You know, and there was beyond that, like from the community, you know, and not that I was ever really kind of checking in with what people thought about what I was doing or whatever, but I'm sure there was like, you can feel energy, you know, even if people don't vocally say something. And I'm sure there's people like, oh, this is like, he must be going to music school because he didn't get in anywhere else.
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
like
we've
that
all
kind
heard
of,
that.
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
like I had to be like, no, John Mayer went here. It's really good. I promise.
So one semester.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, you know, I tell people that Sid Sriram went here. So that was my how I got buy-in.
That's so good.
But I think, see, what it came down to for me was ultimately there has to be like for whatever it is you want to do, you know, like whether you want to be a performer, composing for films, if you want to be an educator, whatever it is, like if you can identify what you believe your purpose is, and obviously purpose is a very loaded term. It can be so many different things for any one individual. But if you can start to kind of like find that the shades of what like really kind of make you move inside, that's really all you need. And it's oversimplifying it to a degree, but I do think when it comes down to it, push comes to shove, and it's like that nighttime and you're in bed and you're like, everything sucks, nothing is moving. Why am I doing this? Should I have chosen a different path? How am I going to make money? You know, practical things like that. For me, and there's been many moments. I'll specifically talk about one point in my life. This was 2015. That song that I talked about, the mug, Blue Porcelain, that song, that just come out in November, maybe October 2015. It wasn't really doing anything. Like, it wasn't moving the way I thought it would, you know. And I left for India like the next day after that song released, which was planned. I didn't just like decide on a whim, but I got there, and again, like this was I graduated Berklee in 2012. This was 3 years since. My career in Indian cinema, I had 3 big songs, 2 with A. Rahman sir, 1 with Anirudh, but it wasn't like I wasn't seeing much progress, like personally, financially, you know, any of that. And so I didn't really feel like there was forward motion. And the people around me were being very honest. They're like, yo, what's the deal? What do you want to do? You know, how are you going to sustain this? And this coming after having worked with the man I'd idolized since I was a child, you know? So like,
that one break doesn't mean that life is set from there.
Not at all. And that was a very rude awakening for me. You know, I thought it was going to be all peachy after that first song came out. But it was one specific night. I was like just laying in bed, frustrated, and like there's like this feeling that sometimes you get. I'm sure everyone gets it, but just like a deep emptiness, like right below your heart, you know. And I was angry, and it just kind of like made me think about, okay, why do you do what you do? Obviously making money is a very practical aspect of any profession, but beyond that, beyond being popular, what do you want to get out of all of this? And all I had to do was ask the question. I still don't have like a set answer for that, and it's 2020, it's 5 years since.
Yeah.
But I had to ask the question, and that set me off on a path subconsciously of realizing that, like for me, music is a sense of peace. It is cathartic. It is a way to just like keep my mind in a good place, and as I kind of started uncovering these things that were very non-practical, if you may, it allowed me to just embrace the journey a little bit more and the actual process, and also it got me back to the fire. I remember when I was a kid, just like the sense of elation I would get sitting on stage and performing and people looking, and there's like this magic when you produce sound from your own body and like it reverberates and you can see or feel the impact it's having on people. It allowed me to get back to that. And once I got back to that, soon after that, it's funny how things work, man, because soon after that night, it might have even been the same night, actually. I don't remember exactly, and I don't want to make it too like magical because maybe it was like 2 nights later, but I got a call from Rahman sir's studio. I was in Chennai and I recorded Tali Pogade. That came out, Jan 1st, and then the rest was kind of history after that.
Yeah.
So I think to people, if you're going through it, like really going through it, just dig in. No one from the outside world is going to be able to give you like real answers. They'll be able to set you in your directions of getting back to your own source, I think. And I have had numerous conversations with different people over the years that have helped me kind of like just acted as this like invisible arrows almost. It's like kind of like help me get back to, okay, this is what I need a soul search about. This is what I gotta think about. This is what I need to deal with. These are like the scars I have not yet even really like revisited. And I think so it's within you for sure. I that's what I've realized. It's when in your deepest moments of hardship, even when it's not like that intense of a hardship, if it's like a small kind of thing that's kind of got you stuck, I think being able to be real with yourself and just kind of like have those conversations. Some people call that prayer. Other people, like it manifests in so many different ways.
Yeah. No, that's really, really cool. I just love hearing about this introspection thing. And just how it guides you and other people guide you. Because I feel like especially as artists, but just as people as part of any community, we lean on each other. That invisible arrow thing is such a great way of putting it. And I feel like, the more people you're able to engage with, the more kind of, I don't know, potential you have to be that arrow for someone, in a similar way that you were for me, or I might have been for someone else.
Sure.
And, the way you talk about some of these things, even in your music, like with Eyes Open, you talked about earlier, you almost process some of these internal conversations in the music. And I wonder how you kind of deal with that, maybe outside of like a music-based medium. Like, do you use social media or your ability to engage with people as another way to kind of discuss some of these things that you're thinking about, whether they're social or kind of abstract ideas? But do you feel that that's something you should be doing, or is music your primary way of kind of dealing with these ideas?
Sure. We live in an interesting time, where there's 100%, I won't say access, but with social media and technology, like it feels like you're switched on all the time. There's like that turn off point is not really, it's non-existent unless you very intentionally make a decision to remove yourself from the space that is the internet, you know? I will say this. I think for me, how I would like to make most of my statements and how I would like to engage in social responsibility is through my music and through the act of just being as fearlessly honest as possible through my music. I think in the same breath, I think it is important to use these platforms to let people know who you are. You know, I think so often the online spaces are used somewhat performatively, you know, and I think that's very dangerous because, and I'm talking from a point of not like society at large, but talking about individual to individual. I think it's dangerous because it really messes with your head if that's what you're doing, you know, because I think the biggest thing that can kind of drive someone insane is having to appear to be something all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and this is just like, no matter what the context, no matter what the time, no matter where you're from, if you have to be performing, if you have to be having this front up, man, it's not fun. You know,
it's tiring.
Yeah, it's tiring. It's painful. It's all the things that are not good. Kind of balled it up into that act of I'm gonna act like this is who I am. So my act of defiance against that, I guess, would just be like, just be as real as you can possibly be with yourself. And I try to do this. Again, this is a lifelong journey. I have many moments of like being like, oh, should I put this up? Should I tweet this? Because it seems like what I should be doing right now. Sometimes there's just these points of just like very honest expression where I'll just write a whole kind of thing. And those things that I put up are like really kind of like bearing how I very honestly feel in those points in time. And I'll post that up, and I'll always know personally when I've either posted something online or said something during a conversation or whatever. And when it is just coming from the fabric of who I am, you know, versus when I'm doing something because it seems like what I should do. It's a hard balance though, man. Like it's not easy. You know, there's a lot of shit going on right now.
Yeah.
Plain and simple, all over the world. You know, there is, I think, a collective just like awakening. Obviously, it's not, globally, it can't happen all at the same pace. It's, you know, but with that said, you know, it makes it even more critical, I think, of people just being themselves as unapologetically as possible. Because I think collectively, if we can do that as individuals, if that's the energy we're putting out, and there's more and more people that are doing that, who kind of state their convictions clearly, if it's through music, if it's through just speaking, if it's through visual art, whatever. Again, this is like, doesn't matter what your background is. You don't need to be an artist to express yourself, you know? But as long as that expression is honest, I think that can only lead to really, really great things in the world. And I think that in a way is social responsibility, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally agree.
That's exactly it. Authenticity all the way. And
on this note, after you have basically exposed everything, I'd love to take us slightly into our audience questions. So let's first acknowledge amazing Sid. What journey it's been into your brain.
Thank you.
I would also love to acknowledge all of the people who are tuning in. We have, I can't entirely tell, but I'm pretty sure it's over 200 people currently watching. And Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. We're very excited that you're all watching, and we hope you've been gaining as much insights from this as I have, anyway, and I think all of BIX has. Because we're running out of time, I'm going to choose to summarize some questions because we have a lot of questions that are kind of in the same genre.
Let's do it. Yep.
Sure.
So in general, we've had a huge demand for advice for young budding artists. What would you tell young artists?
This
who
whole
are starting-
conversation.
We've
I know,
done
and
this.
yet they're like, I'm a young person. What can I do in life to like move myself forward? And I don't know whether there's a recipe, and I suspect.
No, I can speak to that.
Cool.
I think, yeah, whatever we've talked about up until this point, I think can provide just some insight as to how I've grown. But beyond that, this is something I talk about all the time, but really falling in love with the process, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That's been the biggest thing. When you're not seeing results, not being result oriented, really. You know, I think that's a big one that has kind of, and I've learned that over the years. I was definitely the dude that would upload a video to YouTube and like 20 minutes later be like, yo, how many views does this have? Why aren't there no comments? You know, I was that guy for sure for a long time. But yeah, falling in love with whatever, if you're a young budding musician, whatever the discipline that you study, or multiple disciplines, digging into it, and again, understanding it's a lifelong journey. There's no end point to any of this. It's just acquiring as much knowledge, ideas, inspiration as you possibly can, and treating each day, you know, especially like during now, like lockdown time. I know like some parts of the world are still on lockdown, or like whatever stage y'all are in. It's such a beautiful time to wake up, approach the day like, yo, I have stuff I can learn. And that is very, very inspirational because you can discover whole universes from like your bedroom, you know? So that's what I would say. Fall in love with the process. Don't peg these like, you can set expectations for yourself. Like, you know, like how in the beginning of this conversation, I said that me and my folks set out, like I set out to get a Grammy at the end of my first year at Berklee. Like, again, at the time, actually, when we set the goal, I was quite serious about it. But once I started school, I realized like, oh, I don't even know how to write a song. I don't like, you know, but let those just be like little, like, don't place too much significance on that type of shit. It should just be about, are you getting better? Are you digging into the different layers of music instead of it just being the superficial exercise where you can impress people? You know, that's what I would say.
I think this is a fantastic answer. I hope everybody who has had a question that surrounds this topic is really going to go and internalize it and think about what this means for themselves. I don't know. Annette, how do you feel? Do you want
I think we should do at least two more.
Great.
Yeah.
We've got a whole bunch of questions surrounding musicianship, artistry as a career in India specifically. We have one that actually voiced it very nicely. In India, there arguably is an inherent culture which discourages people from taking up the arts as a profession. As a successful artist yourself, why do you think this view exists, and to what extent do you think it's justified?
Sure. So I didn't grow up in India, you know, so I can't really speak to like the seeds of that thought. I think those type of things, we are made aware of those kind of things at a very young age. You know, these kind of cultural, social constructs that say this is the direction you should go in or not go in. So I can't speak to overcoming those specific barriers that come with growing up there, but you know, being a diaspora kid that grew up in the Bay amidst mostly Indian people, look, it's gonna come down to I mean, the reason that exists is just because there's been a certain stigma attached to the arts, the fact that, I mean, A.R. Sir talks about this all the time, and obviously he is, born, brought up, everything from in India. There's a stigma attached that like musicians aren't responsible, or it's not a commercially viable career. Those different things. You just got to believe in it beyond all that stuff. Again, that's oversimplifying it. I think I will say this. I think in this day and age, there's a lot more. There are many more avenues that have opened up that can allow you to kind of follow the path, probably still with resistance, but I think there is, if you really, really, truly want to do it. I mean, we all know people that have, faced multiple blocks or whatever. I don't know. I'm rambling now.
No, I think I absolutely agree. I think there's a shift, though. There is a shift that we're starting to see now, and I think that's why it's important to also talk about the various things one can do as a creative person.
Sure.
And to remember that performance is not the be all end all of a creative life.
Sure.
Just like you talked about in terms of performing on social media, like having that mask, having a front. But I think educating our society about the myriad roles that one can play
100%.
within this mosaic of arts, whether it's education or it's lighting or it's videography or photography or film scoring or entrepreneurial stuff like management, design. I mean, there's a gazillion things that one can do as a creative person. And I think even before our parents or our neighborhoods or societies start to shift, I think people who are creative need to have that mental realization or awakening to the myriad things that they can do as a creative person.
Sure.
So
I think
that's
lockdown
is
actually lockdown's been strangely beneficial in that way. I know so many friends. I mean, even I've had to deal with this the last few months of I can't depend on going to a studio and someone else is going to set up all the stuff and I just go in and I have to learn, okay, how do I use this interface? How do I do this? Is GarageBand enough? And all of these questions we're figuring out on our own, like you said, all the things that we have the potential to do, and then our parents are seeing that, or the people we're with are seeing that, and then understanding really like what the scope is of this kind of
Sure. And just to quickly piggyback, I think there's a difference between something being a hobby and something being a profession, and I don't think that is defined by money. It's just, and this is something my father always kind of like used to try to instill in me, and then once it clicked, it really clicked. But it's about the dedication that you put forth to the craft, whatever that may be, and like, is it running in your head all the time? Because like Annette said, there are so many there's infinite different kind of like paths that you can take as an artist, as a creative person. If that's all that's going in your head, you're like, oh, I really feel like I need to do this, you will find a way, for sure. And I think that's where becoming a professional kind of jumps in, where you're like, oh, I enjoy doing this. This is fun. Or like, no, this serves me to no end, and I'm going to figure out how to make it happen. Come on, man.
Yeah.
I think you come to a point where you realize you need it, or you won't exist much longer.
100%. 100%.
Should we do one last?
Yeah, I think we can do
one last
question.
Oh
boy, we're about to get lynched. Well, actually, it's a funny question to follow what you just said, but some people have actually been asking, if you had not gone into music, what would you be doing?
I have no idea.
I would rather that reality doesn't exist. I think the world needs you
for our benefit.
Sid. Actually, Sid, would you mind is there something from what you talked about today that you feel inspired to sing like a couple lines from?
Sure.
And tell us a story. We want a story.
Okay, yes. Story time.
Because you're good at stories.
I feel like, especially because the story I told about 2015 and that point in time, I think Talipogade would be a good thing to sing because I could really kind of define my life into kind of like different movements, I guess, or like phases. Yeah, and that point really kind of marked the phase I've currently been in. I feel like I'm kind of transitioning out of right now, but like the last 4 odd years of my life, you know. And I'll just, I spoke about before Talipogade, before it came out, and kind of like where I was at. I'll also kind of speak on after because and are we okay on time for me to talk about, like, just kind of go into it? Okay.
Just do it.
So that song came out January 1st, and while we were recording it, we knew it was something really different. Well, I wasn't sure how it was going to be received, but there was not even enough time. We recorded in December. 2 weeks later, on December 31st, I had a Carnatic concert, finished that, and I got called back to the studio to make some small changes to the song. And then they released it the same night. So it was like there was no real time to like process, like, oh, I hope this does well or whatever. Just like it was out. And it kind of took off as soon as it came out.
Yeah.
And I left back to the States a couple months. At that time, I would just go to India for like a month in the summer, 2 months, November, December, and then be back in the States. And I came back and I found myself having to go back to India for like, there was 2 times that spring where I made like a weekend trip to Chennai. It was just like I was spending more time in the air than I was on ground.
Yep.
And me and my dad were talking, and he's like, there's something happening out there and we gotta like go look at it, because it felt like a groundswell. It didn't feel like the other songs had come out where it was kind of like the songs were big but people weren't necessarily paying attention to me. So from that point on, July, we went back to Chennai, started spending like 6 months in India. And I think, and that's kind of what it's been since then. Sometimes 6 months, sometimes a little bit more. But I feel like that was the point where I really started embracing my identity. Up until, and this is something we didn't really talk about, but it's not the easiest growing up. I'm guessing any immigrant that moves to the U.S. But I can specifically speak to my own journey. That kind of embracing of one's identity. The spectrum of it is there's a lot of identity crisis that I felt from when I was super young to even now, but that really kind of, I never would have imagined in a million years. When I was at Berklee, I had this whole vision for myself. I was going to like put out an album right after or around when I was graduating that was going to get really big. I was going to like start working with like Kanye and stuff like that same year. But instead, I got to work with AR Sir, which in my mind is a bigger deal.
Yeah.
For me personally.
Yeah.
And I never would have imagined that India, Chennai would be where my career took off. But those 6 months that I started spending then, it started just, I feel like, I'll say this, I feel more at home there than in the city that I grew up in now, and I felt like I was actually able to start. Before, I used to feel a little like weird in my own skin, just like, am I saying the right thing? Am I moving the right way? But once, it didn't happen immediately, but once we started doing those half a year over there, and I really started to kind of like, I started to embrace who I was, understand myself, get back in touch with my culture, not just as like a reference to the culture, but actually, like being in it, being of it. And I think I have that song to kind of attribute all of that to,
Wow.
So that's a big thank you to AR Sir, Damare, who wrote the lyrics, Gautam Menon, who directed the film. So I'll sing a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeno vanile marde, mani tuli pogde, marbin vegam kudile, manamu yeno sollavate tedde, kannellam niyedaan irkindrai, மேல் நான் கோபம் கொண்டேன் இமை மூடிடு என்றேன் நகரும் நொடிகள் அசையடு போலே முதுகின் மேலே விழுவதினாலே வரி வரி கவிதை தள்ளி போகாதே எனையும் தள்ளி போக சொல்லாதே இருவர் இதழும் மலர் எனும் முள்தானே தள்ளி போகாதே எனையும் தள்ளி போக சொல்லாதே இருவர் இதழும் மலர் எனும் முள்தானே. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you guys for this space and this what you guys are doing. It's beautiful. I mean, everything that you guys are doing, but this specifically, I think I've not personally had many moments where interviews turn into just, honest, vulnerable conversations. I think it's important for fellow artists, just people of the world, to be able to get this insight. And I personally am just really happy that we got to do this.
Me too. Us too. Yeah. So much love, Sid.
So much love to every single one of you guys and everyone watching too.
Yeah. So thank you for keeping it real. Thank you for reminding us. You said some things that I think I'm gonna go over, and I have some processing to do. I realized some things today. So thank you for just being.
It's all love. I'm honored.
All love, indeed.
For sure.
So to everyone who's joined us, we are just so grateful. Thank you for choosing to spend a little bit of your Saturday with us. And please keep writing to us, and please, if you're not already following Sid, which doesn't make any sense, make sure that you're following him. Ro or Lids, can you just put up the other information if you want to follow what BIX is doing? Let's just keep making art and keep being ourselves and keep being kind to each other, because we're all struggling with something or the other. And thank you, Sid, for being just yourself. I remembered something that when we I think Marianne Williamson talks about this, when we allow ourselves to be fully our authentic selves, we give other people the permission to be that themselves.
Yeah, I love that.
You're just all of that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Okay, so another chai time with BIX. We should take one photo. I remember Ro's dad and my dad and Steven, I think, took. Where shall we put them? Okay. Wow, I dropped what? All right, chai time with BIX.
Yay.
Or maybe center row. Then we have two all in the center.
Oh, there we go.
So OCD.
Love it.
Love you all.
Love you guys.
Have
joining,
a
everyone.
beautiful day. Bye, Sid.
Bye-bye.
Love.
Jago Pia.